So, as I was just reintroduce myself really quickly, I'm a bailiff from Medic Footprints and introducing Katie Rose.
I can't even remember what I said then, but yes, my name's Katie Rose Cawthorne. I am a digital health startup consultant working with Acorn, and yeah, I work really closely with kind of entrepreneurial doctors, nurses, kind of everyone who kind of works in healthcare who's got like a startup idea, and I work with them and mentor them really closely kind of on the journey of starting their startup.
Hi, and I'm Rohit Chitkara. I'm also part of Medic Footprint, and I'm the lead for the pitch competition and the ACW awards as well.
So Rohit, just tell us briefly, who have we got as a finalist in the startup pitch competition? What kind of company?
In the finalists who are attending now, or in general?
The startup pitch competition.
Oh, so we've got all sorts. We've got people helping medical students get into med school. We've got people dealing with improving access to mental health. We have we've got other companies who are dealing with sort of gaining making it easier to get phlebotomy, that kind of thing. So we've got a whole wide range of different companies that'll be pitching on Friday.
Fantastic. I really can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it. And it's going to be compared by Lafina Diamandis, who is she's an entrepreneur in her own right. She runs a property investment workshops as well as Eureka Doc, which they have a lot of educational material for doctors who are exploring alternative careers. And she's a GP trainee, and she's an NHS clinical entrepreneur. So if you are registered for the ACW event, you can register for the networking event, which is at 7 o'clock this Friday. So just for those who are with us, just to kind of familiarise yourself, if you have any questions as we go along, please complete the questions in the question box, which should be on your panel, just towards the bottom. And we do have some kind of stop-off points for a few questions, and then we'll do some more at the end. So the webinar in itself should take about 45 to 50 minutes in total. So before we start, we love to do a poll to find out more about who's here. So what is your current experience in pitching? So Rohit's opened the poll for us. So if you could vote now, what kind of experience do you currently have? So have you tried pitching before? In any capacity whatsoever? Have you even entered any competitions like the Pitching Palace, or are you complete novice and basically kind of your practice was requesting radiology requests, which actually, if you can do that successfully, then you've demonstrated a lot of skills. So we've 63% of you have voted so far, nearly 70%. So a few people yet to vote. We'll give it a few more seconds. 81%, awesome. 88%, nearly there. Oh wow, we've nearly got 95%. Someone's holding out and can't decide. But we'll give you a few more seconds, and then we will close the poll right now. So Rohit, why don't you tell us about the results?
So over half the people, 53% of you have only I've done radiology requests. I say only, I mean that's still pretty. I struggle with that. And we have 27% have actually pitched to interested parties before, and then there's a couple of you who pitched your startup to actually raise money or entered a competition in the past. So yeah, bit of a spread, but mainly centered around the radiology sphere.
We've all been there, haven't we? All right then, so I think we're going to hand over to Katie. So Rohit, why don't you share Katie's screen?
Yeah. There we go.
Oh. Can you see me? Well, not me, but my screen. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I've already introduced myself. So I work for a company called Acorn, and we're a health tech co-foundry. So it's kind of like an accelerator, but I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go through. And it's good that kind of the audience of this webinar have got a mixed experience of pitching, so hopefully you'll all be able to get something from this webinar. And as Abena said, we are sponsoring the ACW pitch competition this Friday. So we're really excited to do that, and we're sending some of our investment board to judge the event. So hopefully I'll be able to share some kind of like the inside knowledge so you can perfect your pitch in time for Friday. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to cover today. So before I jump into kind of what makes a good pitch, I just wanted to explain a little bit about Acorn and the methodology that we use, so that I'm making the assumption that most of the audience are kind of involved in the startup world in one way or another. So I'm hoping that by explaining the way we work and the way that we advise and mentor startups, hopefully you'll be able to have some useful takeaways and maybe kind of have a learning that you can then go and action with your startup. So yes, it's going to take about 45 minutes. There's going to be 2 question points throughout the presentation. So I think Rohit's going to be collating those questions. So we'll stop about halfway through to answer the first set of questions. And yeah, I was going to send an email out afterwards as well with some useful resources that I usually share with the startups that I work with. So I'll send those out afterwards as well for you, some like further reading and all that sort of stuff. So I'll just dive right in. Cool. So who is Acorn? So essentially, our mission is to give digital health startups the best possible chance of success. And we do that by partnering with clinical entrepreneurs. So I'm guessing people like yourselves. And although it isn't a requirement to kind of have a medical degree, we will work with people who have just got an idea, as long as they have some sort of support from a clinician in one kind of guise or another. And we partner with these clinical entrepreneurs, and we provide them a full team to kind of execute their startup. We provide them access to a wide range of kind of experts in various different fields, whether it's kind of IP or the whole MHRA compliance process. So we kind of provide them with access to mentors and experts, and then we also provide them with investment as well. So it's easy to explain Acorn as an accelerator, but we're a lot more hands-on than kind of your typical accelerator. And we also have we take equity from the startups we work with as well. So we're really motivated to create successful startups. So I'm sure, although this looks a little bit depressing, but I'm sure you're all aware that creating a digital health startup is really, really, really risky. And it's riskier than other industries. So I think kind of across startups in general, it's about 90 to 92% failure rate for startups, but that goes up to 98% in digital health startups, according to Forbes. So on this slide here, there is a little infographic here kind of detailing some of the most common reasons for failure. And there's some extra reasons that kind of are specific to digital health. So the most common reason for startup failure is someone has a really, really exciting idea. They either have the resources themselves or they go out and seek the resources to build their product. They build their product, and when they launch it, they're really surprised when they're not getting any users or they're struggling to get customers. And then that ultimately means they run out of money and then they fail. So what we think, and it's kind of like widely accepted in the startup world, is that before embarking on building any sort of product, you really need to do your research and understand kind of, is this something that actually someone will use in the real world? So that's something that startups often don't do, and kind of to their detriment. The second most common reason why startups fail is because they hire poorly or they hire people too soon. So it's kind of this one's just a common sense one, really. Having fixed outgoings before you have a fixed income often means that people run out of money, and then unfortunately they fail. And another top 3 reason for failure is lack of focus. So again, startups have a really kind of generally don't have that much resources, and they need to be really clever in the way that they utilize those resources. And often a lack of focus means that time, money, and energy is wasted on the wrong things, which again leads to kind of being burnt out earlier. earlier than you like. And there's some kind of more general things there, like, you know, the typical kind of co-founders that don't get on very well, and then, you know, there's kind of conflict there, or sometimes people don't have kind of expertise in sales and marketing. So you might have like an engineer who's like an expert in his particular field, but when he comes to selling his idea and pitching his idea, you know, he can't execute that side of it. So they're kind of the top reasons for failure. And kind of in the health tech sphere, I'm sure you guys are all aware of this, but the NHS ecosystem, obviously in the UK, is incredibly complex and confusing and difficult to navigate. So that makes it really, really difficult to sell into. So that's a huge barrier for health tech startups in the UK. And also, if your particular startup idea is classified as a medical device, then it will have to go through a process of MHRA compliance, in which that is, again, really time consuming and costly, and can take up to 2 years. So if you don't have the resources to kind of keep you going for those 2 years, then that can ultimately lead to failure. So the good news is, just to kind of brighten the note a little bit, is that these failures are preventable with experience. You know, startups are really fragile due to their limited resources, but this is where it's good to kind of bring in experts and mentors. So this is where Acorn comes in. Over the kind of our existence, we have built up kind of a wealth of knowledge and experiences, and also there's so much kind of like the startup world has a huge community. So, you know, it's really, really important to learn from the mistakes that others have made, so that you don't make the same mistakes and then fail due to one of those reasons mentioned before. So who is Acorn? So Acorn is made up of 3 separate organisations. I'll talk about Nova first, because Nova is who I work for. So Nova has been working in the startup field. So we're like I imagine it's kind of what it's like to go into like Google or Facebook or something like that. Kind of like our office, we have, you know, ping pong tables and all that sort of stuff. It's a very cool place to work. And we've been working in the startup arena for about 9 years or so. And over that time, we have developed a process that we've iterated and continually learned and improved, that we have learned from the failures of the startups. And we have integrated this process with the Lean Startup movement. So I don't know if you guys have heard of Eric Ries and Steve Blank, but they've written loads about Lean Startup and kind of the benefits of working in a lean way. I'll share the resources after this webinar. So we've developed a process based on all of these things, and the current stats for a startup going through Nova's process is that they are 6 times more likely to succeed by following our process than going it alone. And I'll talk a little bit more about the process in a bit, so hopefully you can kind of have some useful takeaways from that. The second organisation that makes up Acorn is Alderhay Children's Hospital. For those of you that don't know, it's a kind of a big tertiary children's hospital just outside of Liverpool city centre, and they provide like a really great test bed for our startups to kind of test and get feedback on their products as early as possible. And they're really well networked, so if a startup product isn't kind of suitable for the paediatric environment, they'll link our startups up to, you know, other organisations that might be more suitable. And the final organisation is Deepbridge Capital, and they essentially they're a venture capital firm that specialise in life science investments. They give us the funding to be able to do all this. And outside of these organisations, we have advisors who I mentioned before that our startups have access to. So experts in intellectual property, experts in MHRA compliance and all that sort of stuff that can be very costly if you're a startup to kind of pay for those services yourself. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, just to summarise, we're not an accelerator. We've kind of developed our own model called a co-foundry, which essentially we co-found businesses, or we co-found startups with the entrepreneurs that we work with, and that works really well for the entrepreneurs, because it allows them to kind of keep working in their clinical role in the early stages of the startup when it's quite risky. So most of the clinicians that I work with still work full time, and they do this about a day a week, kind of like around their clinical time. So this is the bit that I hope you'll find quite useful. So I've kind of referenced like Nova's process throughout this, and without going into loads of detail, it's essentially a 5-stage process which is gated by investment pitches. So you'll be in one stage, and to get to the next stage you have to pitch for investment, but that's kind of, I'll keep it more general than that going forward. So our process is all about reducing waste and making sure that startups are doing the right thing and are focused on the right thing at the right time, depending on where they are in the startup life cycle. And that makes sure that the startup, as it grows, it is being de-risked step by step. And we make sure that our startups are kind of going through this process in as lean a way as possible. And when I say lean, I mean no waste, just doing things as quickly, just in time, not creating loads of kind of unnecessary documentation, like, 40-page business plans. And just everything that you do has to be has to have some valuable learning out of it. So what I'm hoping now is I'm assuming that each of you in kind of listening to this is probably at a slightly different stage. So I'm hoping that as I talk through the startup life cycle, you might be able to identify where you sit, and then hopefully be able to take away kind of either a next step or a new focus that you can then go and kind of work on outside of this webinar. So starting on the left-hand side, obviously the first stage to starting a startup is having the idea. So that's almost the fun bit. So an entrepreneur or a clinician will have an idea for a product or a better way of doing things or whatever it is. They'll have an idea, and their first instinct will be to go and build it or just go and do it straight away. A lot of the clinicians that I've worked with have been like real problem solvers. They just want to kind of solve the problem straight away. But what we advise people to do is to kind of take stock when they've had that idea and really kind of assess, what problem is this idea going to try and solve? And I'm sure you guys are aware of this kind of in the careers that you're in, is that it's really, really difficult to change people's behavior. So kind of making the assumption that people are going to change their behavior and use your product, it's quite a risky assumption to make, really. So what we feel like the best place to start is to identify a problem that your idea is going to target, and then go and spend a bit of time before building any sort of product and speaking to users and understanding why that problem exists and what they're currently doing to solve that problem. So the first step is always to speak to your users. So once you have established that, yes, this is a real problem, and you understand your users and kind of what makes them tick, now you can start to think about your idea for a solution. And what you want to assess first is, okay, will my idea actually address the problem that my target users and customers have? And the challenge here is to be able to test that without actually spending significant amount of money building a product, because building products is really expensive. So there's many different ways that you can do this, but one of the ways that we like to do this is there's loads and loads of free or really, really cheap like prototyping tools. I can again send some links out after this webinar, where you can, without any technical know-how, kind of build up like a prototype for an app or a web platform or whatever it is that you're looking at, and then you can do it within a matter of hours. And then you can take that to your users that you spoke to when you were talking about the problem, and you can get a feel for, is my solution the right solution? Would people use it? And in this phase here, you'll get some really, really valuable feedback that that will most likely change your direction slightly. And that means that you taking stock at this point means that you've not wasted and jumped straight into building a product before you kind of really have a good sense of whether the product is the right product. Okay, so now you have got what we would call problem solution fit. So at this stage, you've probably de-risked your idea enough to justify building the product. So what we advise startups to do here is, rather than kind of you and your team locking yourself away in a room for kind of 9 to 12 months and just building the product and then launching it, and then potentially finding out that you've made some wrong turns along the way and that the product isn't actually the product that your users want to use. We advise kind of throughout the process of building your product, continually checking in with the users that you've been speaking to kind of so far. And that will ensure that you don't build something that people don't want. So once you've got a product and you've got kind of a core group of what we would call early adopters using your product and getting value out of it because it will be solving their problem, you can then start to experiment with your pricing model and get your business model just right. And that's kind of generally an iterative process where you can experiment and test different ideas. And once you've started to generate revenue, you can then start to spend money on marketing and increase your reach and scale up. So that's kind of our process. We tend to work with startups kind of in the first 3 stages. That's kind of where our expertise lies. But when startups kind of start to leave or start to go into commercialization, we then help them to raise money outside to be able to achieve those stages. So that's pretty much Acorn and our methodology. I just wanted to have a quick stop moment to see if there's any questions, if anyone has any kind of, I don't know, thoughts or questions they want to share at this point.
I don't think many questions have come through so far, apart from people saying hi. If anyone has any questions, please type that in the questions box. If not, we can move on. And if there are any questions that do come up, oh, someone's asked a question. Rohit, I've put Rohit on mute actually. So do you want to unmute yourself? Yeah.
Oh, so we have a question from Yazin asking, how much equity does Acorn usually take?
Yeah, sure. So let's go back to my so Acorn. So the mentor phase, which is the first phase, user problem fit. So at this stage, that's kind of like a free phase. We don't take any equity at that point. Then in the explore phase, Acorn will take 25% equity. And then in the build phase, we will then take a further 25% equity. So at the end of the build phase, the Acorn and the founder will be 50-50 shareholders in the business. So essentially, we don't require any the founder to kind of put in any resources or capital themselves. We kind of take all of that burden, and then we're 50-50 partners in the company. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, none others so far.
I will move on to the pitch bit then. So the next part of the webinar is going to be me talking about what makes a good pitch. And I just want to start with a little bit of a caveat, because I am definitely not an expert in delivering kind of inspiring or really impactful pitches. That is not my forte at all. But what I do, kind of the expertise I do have to share is from working really closely with investors and sitting in on kind of investment board decision meetings. So what we've kind of developed is kind of a know-how of the content that is required to give a good pitch. So I'll talk you through each of the points, and I'm going to use an example as we go through, so hopefully it'll make a little bit of sense. And then at the end, I'm going to do my very best to deliver a pitch to you, so hopefully show you a good pitch at the end. Yeah, and I think it's probably worth mentioning as well before I dive into this is that kind of this is what we really look for on Acorn. So yeah, that's kind of just, this is how I've put this list together. Okay, so the 6 things that make a good pitch. So first of all, you have to evidence your problem. You have to demonstrate some sort of traction. You have to talk about your market size and what competitors are in the market. Then you talk about your solution, and kind of across the whole pitch, you have to demonstrate that you're a capable and a capable founder who kind of knows their domain expertise and is able to go out and sell this product. So I'll go into each into each bit in a little bit more detail. Okay. So first thing, an evidenced problem. So after hearing kind of lots of pitches, one of the things, or one of the kind of biggest mistakes that people make is they spend, kind of 50, 60, 70% of their pitch talking about their solution. And I mean, I can understand why, because this is kind of like their baby and they want to share that. But unfortunately, that can create a lot that can demonstrate a lot of bias, a lot of solution bias, which is something that can be a little bit kind of worrying for the investors, because as I mentioned earlier, you will be working, it's best to work with users kind of all the way through the process. And what users might tell you is that, your solution should be different, or it should be a little bit more like this or a little bit more like that. So kind of being too solution focused raises the worry that, you might not take on feedback or kind of feedback from your users. So kind of talking too much about the solution is kind of a red flag for investors. So the first thing that you should always start talking about is the problem. So what you should do first is you should lay out the problem and try and be quite specific with it. So rather than kind of just like a high level problem, you should talk about kind of what problem you're trying to solve and who is it a problem for, and also how do you know it's a problem. So I'll demonstrate with an example. So the example I'm going to use throughout this part of the webinar is a medication errors product, which is someone who's recently got investment from Acorn. So it's a product to eliminate medication errors. Okay, so an example of a poor way to talk about a problem in a pitch is something really, really high level, like medication errors lead to patient harm and patient death. So for someone who is not a clinician, it can feel quite intangible. It can kind of see that feels like such a big problem. How are you ever going to solve that with a single product? So it's much better to kind of be quite specific and talk about why it's a problem and kind of how you know that. So I'll flip it around and give a better example of how to evidence your problem. So for the same product, I might say, so junior doctors often make errors when prescribing medication. And this is because they don't have access to the right guidance at the right time. And we know this by interviewing junior doctors at 3 PICU departments across 3 different hospitals. So you can see it's essentially the same problem that I've talked about, but by being specific, I have demonstrated to the panel or the board that I really understand my problem, and because I really understand my problem and my users, I'm more likely to be able to solve the problem well. So problem, that's the problem. So next is traction. So why is it important to talk about traction? Talking about traction gives kind of reassurance to the panel or the board that other people other than yourself and your founding team care about the problem that you're pitching or the product that you're pitching. And the way you might demonstrate traction is different at different stages. So if you're kind of down the earlier side of the startup life cycle, kind of essentially before you've got a product, the way that you can demonstrate traction is by talking about who you have spoken to that is also passionate about solving the same problem. So when I talk through the process, you would have kind of noticed that you'll have users involved at every single stage of the process. So actually what you really want and what we advise our startups to do is to build a guidance panel of early adopters who are kind of almost like committed to providing you feedback at every single stage. And these early adopters are the people that feel your problem or your pain point the most, and they're most motivated to use a product. So as an example, with the medication errors product, the way that we talked about traction was we had recruited 20 junior doctors across 3 PICU departments. And the reason they felt particularly passionate about this problem is because there's an exceptionally large number of medication errors that happen on this particular department purely because of the large number of drugs that they're prescribing. So that was kind of the feedback that we'd had. And if you're kind of further down, like later on in the startup life cycle, you might kind of demonstrate it with the number of kind of customers or users that are repeatedly using your product. So they've used your product once and they're coming back again and again and again, because that really demonstrates that people kind of value your product and your offering. Okay, so that's traction. Market size. So it can be quite challenging to quantify the market, particularly if you're kind of like at an earlier stage. So one thing that I would say here, that it's okay to estimate this if you don't have like the data, because that often happens when we're working with startups. And there's kind of two main approaches that I would recommend taking when you're sizing up your market. So the first one is kind of thinking about the problem and thinking about how much does this problem currently cost an organization or a person or whoever your customer is. So for example, with the medication errors product, the Pharmaceutical Journal published an article recently saying that medication errors currently costs the NHS £2.5 billion per year. So that's one way that you can approach sizing up your market. The other way that you can do it is by looking at what people are currently spending on solving the problems. That kind of indicates, like the appetite for a need for a new solution to the problem. So one way that you could do that for the medication errors product, which is something that we didn't actually do, but it's one way you could approach it, is we could say that pharmacists currently spend about X time every year rectifying these errors that are happening, and this roughly equates to X pounds per year. So that's kind of two different ways you could approach the market size. If you've got data, that's great. If not, then you might have to be a little bit creative in your market sizing. Okay, so nearly there. So existing alternatives. So this is really, really important, because when you're talking about existing alternatives or competitors, it really demonstrates your knowledge and understanding of the market that you're in. And it also shows that you really understand your users. Because that's something that we see quite often is when people pitch their startup and they don't understand their users, and that's a real red flag for the investors. So we call it existing alternatives rather than competitors, because sometimes your biggest competitor isn't always another product or a similar product in the market. It's actually what people are currently using to solve the problem. So as an example, with the medication errors product, what people are currently using is actually just the BNF textbook. So people aren't, there are apps out there in the market, but people aren't using them. They are resorting to using a book. They prefer to use a book. So there's various kind of like I guess studies on this that show that in order to change someone's behavior, in order to use a new product, the new product has to be 10 times better than the old product or the old kind of way of solving a problem. So you have to be clear about why the existing alternatives aren't good enough, and why your users are frustrated with them. Again, so this is kind of, it's so important to speak to your users and to have a group of or have a guidance panel to help you through this, because you're going to get so many useful insights from them. Okay, so your solution, so everyone's favorite bit. So it's really, it's kind of like a nice segue to from existing alternatives to talk about your solution, because now you can demonstrate why your solution is better than so in our experience, it's a lot better to keep talking about your solution, kind of keep it quite high level and keep it more to the benefits, rather than wasting your precious pitch time on going into details about features and functionality and all that sort of stuff. Because the panel will definitely ask you if they are interested. But that, you know, sometimes the detail isn't that important to investors. So yeah, so what is your solution? Keep it high level, and why is it better than the existing alternatives? So with the medication errors product again, I might say something like, you know, we want to build a digital product that gives drug guidance on the go, that allows junior doctors to prescribe the right drug at the right dose and 10 times faster than they currently do. So you get a feel for what kind of product we're going to build, but, you know, we're not kind of hooked onto this. We're not hooked on, or kind of like hooked onto any particular solution per se. That kind of leaves us open to be able to kind of iterate and pivot when we get feedback from our users. And finally, throughout your pitch, you have to demonstrate that you're investable, as in you yourself and not your idea. Because particularly at the early stages, the investors are investing in the person just as much as the idea. The kinds of things that we look for in a founder, this might differ from kind of organisation to organisation, but we look for someone who's really, really passionate and a good communicator. So you have to kind of demonstrate that, you know, you will be able to go out there and get people using your product. Again, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but we look for someone that's quite open-minded, that's not clouded by sort of any sort of solution bias, and that will be open to feedback and open to learning. And finally, this is really important in the digital health space, being a domain expert in whatever kind of area your product kind of sits in. And if you're not a domain expert, then it's really, really good to have access to a domain expert that is maybe like an advisor to your startup, or maybe even part of your founding team, so that they'll help you make the right decisions kind of as you go along. So just to summarize what makes a good pitch, talk about the problem. The problem is the most important thing. And then traction, you know, how are you evidencing that people actually want a product to solve this problem? The market size, so how big's the market? The existing alternatives, so how are people currently solving the problem that you've evidenced, and what's wrong with those existing solutions? Then your solution, why your solution's better than the existing alternatives, all while kind of communicating that you're a great founder and a great person to invest in. So now this is the scary bit, because so for those of you that are pitching on Friday, I think you've got 2 minutes for your pitch. So it might sound difficult to get all of those kind of key points into a 2-minute pitch, but I did want to kind of practice what I preach, and I've put together a pitch which is definitely under 2 minutes, or at least it was when I practiced it, whilst addressing all of the most important points that you have to get across in order to communicate your idea to an investment board. So I'm going to, I guess, just go for it. I'm going to do it for the medication errors product that I've kind of been referencing all the way through. Okay, so my name is Katie, and I'm a startup consultant at Acorn. Junior doctors often make errors when prescribing because they don't have access to the right guidance at the right time. I've interviewed 20 junior doctors across 3 PICU departments and found that they can spend up to 20 minutes prescribing medication for a single patient. And even still, they are making errors. In this 20 minutes, they locate a book, they interpret the relevant information, and then they do some mental maths to carry out the calculations. These doctors talked about the fear of making errors and the anxiety that this can cause. All 20 of these doctors have committed to work with me whilst I develop a product to solve this problem. So how big of a problem actually is this? The Pharmaceutical Journal published a report that indicated that medication errors currently cost the NHS £2.5 billion per year. An audit at a local hospital indicated that 1/3 of these errors are as a result of errors in prescribing and administering medicines. A solution to this problem could save the NHS over £800 million per year. So how will I solve this problem? Imagine if junior doctors had access to a product that would tell them the right drug to prescribe at the right dose and gave them this information at the click of a button. Junior doctors would work more efficiently, make less errors, and be less anxious. Whilst I'm not a clinician, I am working with a consultant intensivist on this project to ensure that the right decisions are made. This will give our product credibility to ensure that it is trusted by our customers and trusted by our users. Thank you. So yeah, so there you have it. I don't know if that was under 2 minutes. I think it might have been. So
1 minute 35, Katie. Sorry.
Was it 1 minute 35? Yeah, smashed it. There we go. So you can get all the points across in under 2 minutes. And one thing that the last bit of advice that I would give you if you're pitching your startup idea is kind of remember that the panel will always ask questions. So don't worry about trying to fit every single detail into your pitch. And it's almost better to kind of leave them wanting more and leave them wanting to ask questions. So that is how to do a good pitch. That's everything that I wanted to say. So thank you so much for listening. Has anyone got any questions or anything?
Yeah, so we've got a couple. Actually, just referencing back to your stuff about Acorn. On the slides you had Ismail's asking what was the 100K, 200K, 400K. What was that?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Sorry, I should have explained that. So I guess the figures at the top that you're referring to, that is the quantity, or I guess the cost of the resource that you are kind of awarded when you're in that phase. So if I explain that more clearly. So when you're pitching to prove problem solution fit, you are given a team to help you achieve that. And the kind of, I guess, the maximum amount that team will cost will be £100,000 in terms of resource. So, you know, we might decide that we want some technical people and they'll have a cost associated with them, or we might find actually we don't need any technical people to prove problem solution fit. Let's just use some designers and some kind of little bit of marketing, or so we kind of agree the best way to prove problem solution fit with the resources that we have access to is within 100K. And then for building the product, you have access to 200K worth of resources, and then kind of goes on like that.
Okay, great, thanks. That makes a lot of sense. Got a question here from Mohill, who's just he wants to know whether Acorn offer any opportunities specifically for medical students, or is it basically what they offer for clinicians? So
okay, so as in coming from a medical student that has a startup idea, do you mean? Yeah, cool. Yeah, so I mean, like we don't kind of we don't have any requirements about our founders, so you can still be a student. We have we got any founders that are students at the moment? We have one founder that's kind of fresh out of university, and she was working with us before she graduated. So yeah, we're kind of open to anybody really. Yeah, as long as you can demonstrate that you're a good communicator, you've got access to domain expertise and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, great. And it's good to know. So, Shoaib's asking, does Acorn only support tech-related startups?
Depends what you mean by tech. So we have, so part of our kind of resource pool, if you like, that founders have access to, we have obviously like kind of digital tech people, and we also have hardware tech people. So we have some startups that we've invested in that are kind of like sensor-based and using that kind of side of technology. But in terms of not using technology at all, I don't think we've invested in anything like that before, but that's not to say that we wouldn't. It's just kind of, that's just the kinds of people that we've had pitching to us. Okay,
great. And Ismail again wants to know, do you support investment in the UK only?
So currently, all of Acorn's startups are based in the UK, but I mentioned that I work for Nova, and Nova works with startups in all different industries. It's just Acorn is health tech only, but we have kind of startups kind of in the fintech arena, so like financial technology, who are based in America. So we, as a company, as in Nova, we do work with startups internationally, but just we haven't on Acorn before, just because we've not had anyone pitch to us from overseas. But I don't think it would be a barrier.
Okay, excellent. And Noral wants to know how does one apply to Acorn, and what are the eligibility criteria, if any?
Yeah, so in terms of applying, we're currently revamping this process at the minute. It used to just be a case of, you contact us and then we'll have a set of assessments. Essentially, you'll kind of like pitch to us and we'll see whether, you meet certain criteria, but we're kind of in the process of automating that at the minute, where it's going to just be an online application form. So that's hopefully going to be launched over the next couple of weeks, next week or two, where essentially you'll submit kind of a very, very short pitch deck. You'll answer a couple of questions about your idea and about kind of your availability. Are you willing to work on this like at least a day a week? Because that's kind of the minimum that we ask people to be able to work on their startups. And then so then we'll assess the application forms that come through, and then people will then get filtered into our mentorship scheme, where they get free mentorship. So no equity is required to kind of be given up at the mentor stage. So then people then pitch for Explore, and then are in the process after Explore. Sorry.
So Katie, with your applications, what percentage of people actually get through?
That's a really good question. So let me just think. So I'd say from Mentor to Explore on that so beforehand. So I'd say that probably about people getting into Mentor, I'd say probably about 60 to 70% of people, maybe 60%.
Mm-hmm.
Then people getting from Mentor to Explore, I'd say that's probably 50% of those people. And then I'd say people getting from the people that are now in Explore getting to Build, it's probably 50% again. Yeah. So I guess once you're kind of working with us, I guess we're all kind of working to try and make it work together. So it's never a no. It's always a no. You need to go and work on this instead, and then you'll come back around and repitch, and then that's kind of how it works. Yeah.
Okay. Go on. Sorry, Rehat.
Oh, sorry. Nora just followed that up with can the startup be at any stage, not just an early stage startup, to work with you guys?
Yeah. So in the past, we generally work with people that are working at the beginning stage, where they've just got an idea. So we haven't really tended to work with people who are at later stages, unfortunately, at this time, just because that's where our expertise lies.
Okay, great. And Ambreen was asking that if the app is based on NHS work, who does the idea or app belong to? Because he or she says their ideas come from their experience of working in a clinic. So does that idea belong to them?
Oh, okay. So as in, it's not come from like a I'm not sure I 100% understand the question. Sorry.
So they said that their ideas come from their experience working in a clinic. So an app to do something with medication. I won't give them too much details away, but they've just got a basic idea, but they want to know if that belongs to them.
I would say. Sorry just to interrupt. Go. Sorry, go on, Katie.
No, you go for it.
No, I think I can basically understand what she's asking. At the end of the day, like we get our ideas from our experiences, right? That's how most people come to market with an early stage idea. It's they recognize a problem, usually in their day-to-day lives, that they think, hey, I could solve that. But then kind of going down that whole journey, it takes a long time. But what I would also say, and I'm sure Katie would say something, is that it's really important to do your market research on whether that idea has already been solved or solved, in a way that you are thinking may have a really good solution. So it really depends. And also it's probably worth, if you've got an idea that you're building a product for, speak very early on to a lawyer, because obviously there's going to be some IP, intellectual property issues involved. And actually we have CMS who are coming to the networking event on Friday, who are actually running a clinic for people with early stage businesses, but our appointments are actually full. So, but they will be around. So if you do have any questions regarding from legal aspects of a startup, then I'm sure they'll be happy to answer your questions. But yeah, Katie, you can answer that too.
No, I think you've answered that better than I could have. I think, yeah, it's difficult. That's one of those things where it really does require a specialist. So that's an example of where, as Acorn, we've recognised that we're not specialists in, startup law. So we have brought in an expert, and our startups can kind of have access to that. Yeah, I would kind of reiterate what Abena said in terms of, everyone gets their ideas from their experiences. So I wouldn't be worried that you were kind of stealing the idea of the clinic that you were working in, if that clinic inspired your idea, if that makes sense.
Katie, I've got a question. If someone's pitching to Acorn, how long do they get to pitch to you? Is it a 2-minute pitch or longer?
So it's actually a 20-minute pitch for us. So that's why I was a little bit worried that my presentation wouldn't quite work with a 2-minute pitch, but it did work, so I was really pleased. Yeah, so it's the way our pitch days work. So we hold our pitch days every month, and it's a 20-minute pitch. Then it's 10 minutes question and answer, and then the founder will leave the room, and and then the board will deliberate. So it's a little bit longer than Friday's event.
Okay. Do we have time for any more questions?
I think one more question from Shoaib.
Yeah. So Shoaib's asking, what happens if a startup fails at any one of the stages? Does Acorn take the full hit financially?
That's a good question. So, as I kind of mentioned this before, it's never a no, you have failed. It's a no, you have failed at this point, but you need to do X, Y, and Z in order to get back on track, and it's just a case of whether the founder wants to pursue that or not. So let me give you an example. Okay, so I'll try and make this make sense. So we had someone that was pitching between explore and build, and they were pitching a certain solution to be used in hospitals, essentially. But the board themselves didn't feel like there was enough evidence that hospitals really wanted this. So that could have been seen as a failure, but actually they said, go and explore a different market, go and explore the care home or domiciliary care market, because we think actually, based on our knowledge and our experience, they're probably more likely to have experience this problem more and be more likely to want a solution. So it was a no, not right now, go and do X, Y, and Z, and if that succeeds, then you're then through to the next round. And obviously it depends on it depends, but generally we will help people through that, but it kind of depends on the decision of the board at the time.
Okay, great. Thanks, Katie. I think that's all the questions that we've got.
Brilliant.
So,
All right, brilliant. Thank you again, Katie Rose, for a really valuable presentation. And I guess we'll hear more from you and your team this Friday.
Yeah, you will.
Competition. I really look forward to hearing some of the feedback from the judges on the pitches, because I'm sure we'll all have a lot to learn from. I hope they won't be too harsh.
No, they're all lovely. They're all lovely. Don't worry.
Brilliant. So so that's it, everyone. Thank you so much for coming this evening. So this recording will be available shortly afterwards, just in case you want to rewatch it or someone else wants to watch. Just to remind you, if you are planning to come to the networking event on Friday featuring Acorn and Katie Rose, you do need to register, just because we do have a limited spaces. We've got over 350 people registered for Alternative Careers event, but we only have space for half of that at this particular networking event. And the link for that would have been in the last organizer message we left on the app. And if you're not coming to the event, but you want to come to the networking event, then please email me for a link, and Abena, ABEYNA, at medicfootprints.org. So, Rohit, have you got anything else to say or comment on?
No, I think that's it. I think thank you, Katie, for a great presentation, and I'm looking forward to even more so the pitching event on Friday and seeing how you guys do.
Awesome. All right. Well, have a great evening, everyone, and thank you, Katie Rose.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.